take over and introduce yourself.
Before I do that, I wanted to tell you guys a little story. So this relates to my first slide. So it was 2004 and I was in Hawaii for the Ironman World Championships. In case people are not aware, Ironman is a swim, a bike ride and a run. Over 3.8 kilometre swim, 180 kilometre bike ride and a 42.2 kilometre run. So the Ironman World Championships are held once a year in Kona, Hawaii. And needless to say, conditions are pretty intense. You race over a volcano. It's usually around about 36 to 38 degrees. Humidity is pretty high, and it's altogether a hot and grueling race. Now, in the lead up to this race, obviously there's a huge amount of training and preparation that's done. And even when you get to Hawaii, there's an athlete village which is teeming with people and companies trying to sell you all sorts of gizmos and gadgets to help you sort of go faster on race day. Now, not to say that any of these gizmos and gadgets are myths, all of them have some solid sports science around them, but even on the day before the race, you have people trying out new gear. So at what point does one kind of, trust in the training that has been done without, getting too caught up in everything that's out there? So we'll head into the presentation, but I just wanted to keep that in mind in terms of some of the myths that have been sort of put out to the public around sports science, training, athlete preparation, nutrition. So just making sure, trying to disconcern, if you like, fact from fiction. So small amount about myself. My name is Dr. Sacha Fulton. I am the owner of Peak Preparation. The fantastic thing about completing a PhD and having a sports science background is the 15 years work that I've been lucky enough to complete with elite athletes. So I've been able to travel the world with sporting teams, work with athletes in the very height of their preparation. And now running my own business, I have the opportunity to take all of those experiences into often the general public who I work with. I am a lover of travel when we can travel, which of course has been a little bit, difficult over the last 12 months. I love sport myself, and I love competing. And just like you guys, I'm passionate about coaching, education, and helping athletes to be the very best that they can be. Probably like many of yourselves, I am a mother as well. This is my daughter, Ashley. I bring her up because you might hear some squeals in the background. It's currently about 42 degrees or 40 degrees here in Perth. So as opposed to being outside playing, she's on the other side of the door with supervision. But you might hear a few of her squeals in the background. My career has led me to work with some really fantastic organisations, and I wanted to acknowledge a few of them here. Gymnastics Western Australia, Subiaco Sports Massage, Milius Consulting, Synchro WA, the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research, the Western Australian Institute of Sport, the Australian Institute of Sport, the University of the Sunshine Coast, the Australian Paralympic Committee, Diving Western Australia, and there are many, many others, lots of different sports that I've worked with, and again, all have helped to shape what I do today. I also work with a number of schools in Western Australia, and it's probably definitely one of my most favourite aspects of my job. So it's led me to kind of understand that my calling really is education, and really passionate about arming people with sports science, the knowledge around sports science to help people make their own decisions. I've had some pretty awesome athletic experiences myself. So the Kona Hawaiian Ironman being one of them. I've completed 8 Ironmans in total, taken my bike across to Europe and cycled through the Alps and the Pyrenees. I've hiked the Camino de Santiago, as Aish mentioned. I've hiked to Mount Everest Base Camp in Nepal. I've been to 2 Paralympic Games, and I've completed the Rottnest Island Channel crossing on a couple of occasions. So welcome to Sports Science Myths Busted. I first wanted to, I'd really like to acknowledge Aish and Jules, who are the founders of the Women's Coaching Association. I've been lucky enough to only meet these girls fairly recently, but I'm completely I'm infatuated, if you like, with their passion and their enthusiasm for what they do. Everything that they've got going on in their own lives. They're, you know, they're not just, they're completing their own research, they're training for half Ironmans, they're parenting children, and they're just all round really quite amazing people. So I'm super excited to be collaborating with them. And I look forward to busting some of these myths with you guys. I wanted to start by first getting a handle on what sports science actually is. So sports science is really the study of long and short-term effects of training and conditions on athletes. Generally in Australia, a sports scientist is an ESSA accredited professional who holds a PhD and uses exercise and science to explore human potential and sporting performance. Really, when we're talking about sports science as a whole, we're actually we're talking about the scientific knowledge, methods, and applications in many different areas. Physiology is one, and that's my specialty, but this also encompasses biomechanics, sports psychology, motor control and development, nutrition, strength and conditioning. And again, it's just a, you know, understand that it's a team of people around an athlete that make, you know, their athletic achievements possible. So I think a great example, which we've all seen recently, have been the Australian Open, which amazingly was still able to be held in Melbourne despite the snap lockdown that happened there. And I think, you know, all of your tennis players, so you may have watched the final last night, Djokovic went for number 9 Australian Open, which was pretty incredible, you know, and one of the first things that he did was to acknowledge the team around him. And most importantly for him on the day was his coach, his manager, and he also specifically acknowledged his physiotherapist who travels with him. Djokovic had an injury that he was battling throughout the tournament, and the physio was able to work on his body and help him through this injury, which I think is just a great example of how sports science is used in athletic preparation. So the job of a sports scientist, so my job basically is to disconcern fact from fiction, if you like, and that's something that we're going to be doing today. So there's a huge amount of, you know, huge amount of knowledge out there, or sorry, let me rephrase that. There's a huge amount of information out there on the internet. And it's part of my job and my colleagues, my sports scientists around Australia and around the world, to review the peer research that's done, to complete our own research publications, and to complete testing and training studies, and really come up with what is fact and what is fiction. So we, as sports scientists, we apply these concepts specifically to the training of an athlete. And really the training of an athlete is about enhancing athletic performance within a specific sport. And again, this doesn't have to be a professional sport by any means. As I mentioned, you know, looking at myself, I am certainly not a professional athlete, but I like to call myself a dedicated age grouper, if you like. I'm a dedicated age grouper, but I use the science that I have at my fingertips to enhance my own preparation as much as I can. And then, of course, when I'm working with my athletes that take their sport and their competitions in a much more serious level, we're able to look at those sort of 2 to 3 percenters that allow the body to train and perform better and recover faster. So with all of that in mind, if you are searching for a reliable information on athlete preparation, but find this huge amount of information that is available to us on the internet sort of confusing and contradictory, then you've come to the right place. So we are going to bust some of the most popular yet inaccurate sports science myths out there by understanding the science behind them. Today, we're going to attempt to bust 8 sports science myths: low intensity training for effective fat burning, turning muscle into fat, bulky women from heavy weightlifting, bad carbohydrates, carbohydrate loading, bad lactic acid, no pain, no gain, and rest days. Are they or are they not for lazy people? So just a couple of housekeeping tips from myself. As I go through these myths, Aish is going to be managing all the incredible hundreds of questions, you know, scientific questions that you'll have thrown at me. So Aish is going to manage all of those. We'll attempt to answer a couple of questions after each myth, and we can answer some more at the end of the presentation. Fear not, if all of that fails and we completely run out of time, I'm very happy to make my contact details available for you all, and we can answer some of those questions offline, and maybe we can even turn them into another webinar. Anyway, that was just an idea, you guys, that I just thought of then. So let's get into it. So myth number 1, to effectively fat burn, you have to train at a low intensity for a long duration. False. Not correct. You don't have to train at a low intensity for a long duration. And I think really what the most important thing to understand here is actually how the body burns fuel during an athletic event. Now, certainly there is a fat burning zone, if you like, but let's be very clear about how the body uses fuel. So we have fat, carbohydrate, and protein to burn when we exercise, when we study, when we work. We're not ever burning one of these fuels at a single time. It's always a combination of the 3 of them. Protein kind of gets burnt the least, if you like, or if we get to a stage of needing protein, then we've probably been exercising for a very, very long time. So really it's fat and carbohydrate that we're talking about. Now, fat burning, so exercising at lower intensities for longer periods, at a low intensity, you will tend to burn more fat than glycogen, but you're also burning calories at a much slower rate. So just bear this in mind when we're talking about effectively fat burning. If you were to sort of use this myth, if you like, and try and burn fat by completing low intensity exercise, you would pretty well have to be exercising all day to effectively burn fat. What the research has found is that short, high intensity workouts will actually improve your blood lipid profile and your insulin sensitivity much more effectively and have much better fitness outcomes. So whilst exercising at this higher intensity will burn carbohydrates first, you will inevitably, carbohydrates will run out very quick as well, whereas fat is something that we have a lot of and can keep us fueled for long periods of time. So once that carbohydrate is burnt off, if you like, we'll then get into burning fat a lot quicker than what we would do if we were going to be exercising at a very low intensity. So your fat burning zone, just to clarify, your fat burning zone is around, or sorry, what we're classifying this fat burning zone is, it is around this sort of 60 to 70% of your maximum intensity. But as I mentioned before, it's going to, at this very slow rate, it's going to take a very long time to effectively burn fat. Now, fat burning and improving cardiovascular fitness also actually get themselves sort of mingled up, if you like. And I just wanted to, clarify that these are two very separate fitness outcomes. So people talk about wanting to fat burn whilst training for a marathon or fat burn whilst training for an Ironman. It's a very difficult thing to do, to try and lose weight and train for an athletic event and effectively train for an athletic event. So just so that people are aware, cardiovascular, as to what cardiovascular training is, because cardiovascular training and fat burning, as I mentioned, are two quite different things. So cardiovascular training can enhance the body's ability to metabolize fats and carbohydrate into fuel. And it's really the aerobic capacity that we're talking about. So this is the ability of the heart and lungs to deliver oxygen to the working muscles. So trying to enhance that system is quite different from trying to burn fat. And two of them, they operate quite differently. So we've got improving cardiovascular training or enhancing aerobic capacity, and then we've got fat burning as well. So to come back to our myth of, does to effectively fat burn, do we have to operate at these very low intensities for very long periods of time? It's not the most efficient way to fat burn. So the most efficient way to fat burn is to actually do short, high-intensity training and obviously have a dedicated nutrition regime at the same time. Aish, do we have any questions on that myth there?
Yes, just one question, Sacha. So you mentioned how long should you train for? I mean, like short, high-intensity training. What is that time frame for that? How long should you train for short, high-intensity training?
Awesome question. So again, the long, slow duration training, we're pretty well talking about. Sorry, I'm going to remove this bunny rabbit that's behind my right shoulder. He's distracting me. There we go. So long, slow intensity duration, we're talking about hours and hours on end, whereas your short, high intensity are things like your many of the fitness classes that are available in gyms. So a 40-minute workout, looking at 40 seconds on and 20 seconds off for that period of 40 minutes is well and truly long enough to actually burn off those carbohydrates and start that process of fat burning.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. Sports science myth 2, muscle can turn into fat and fat can turn into muscle. Now, even with the Olympic, so false, number one, even with the Olympic athletes that I've worked with, I have constantly, and sorry, let me just come back one step and just clarify, if you are someone out there that has thought that it is possible to turn muscle into fat and fat into muscle, please don't think that, you're silly or you're stupid or you don't understand things. All of these myths have been plugged so much, over time across the internet that it's no wonder that a lot of people actually feel that some of these things are true. So please don't think that, you've been living under a rock or anything. If you do believe these things, this is just a chance for me to clarify to you with the science that is available, as to whether these are true or false. And it's actually, it's not true. And as I said, I've got plenty of Olympic athletes that have often said to me, you know, if I stop training, I'm really worried that my muscles will turn into fat. So Olympic athletes believe that these myths are true, but they're actually not. It's completely impossible to convert fat into muscle or muscle into fat. They're two completely different tissues in the body. And to such a degree that there's actually no mechanism that exists to reconstruct fat into amino acids. So your muscle mass is made up of amino acids, and amino acids can only be produced in the body by other amino acids. So it is, you know, and that process of building lean mass, muscle mass, happens over a very long period of time, and it's a real combination between exercise and nutrition. So there's a lot of lean proteins and carbohydrates out there that that are beneficial for building muscle mass, and of course the specific training that goes with that. But once you've built that lean mass, even if you have time away from sport, that muscle mass is not going to suddenly turn into fat. You might find that the lean mass gets stripped away. So often we find that if athletes, you know, face injury and they've got to be in a moon boot for a certain period of time, there will be muscle atrophy. There'll be wasting away of the muscle, but it doesn't turn into fat. You might find that extra fat is laid down, but as mentioned, they're two completely different tissues. So again, just to have a look at the structural components of fat and muscle. Fat tissue is made up of fat cells. They're actually droplets. So they're hundreds of droplets that are stored triglycerides. So a triglyceride is a 3 fatty acid molecule, which is attached to a single glycerol molecule. Now, fat has many very important functions in the body. So we need fat to keep us warm when it's cold. Fat is protection when it comes to sort of combat sports. Fat operates as a way to store energy in the body as well. Muscle cells, on the other hand, contain protein filaments of actin and myosin that slide past one another, producing a contraction. Now, this contraction changes the length and the shape of the cell, of that muscle cell, and this is what enables us to move. So fat doesn't actually enable us to bend our arm or contract a muscle. That is the job of the muscle. So both fat and muscle have structural properties and structural components, but they've got two very different functions in the body, and they're two very different tissues, and one cannot turn into another. Aish, any questions on that one?
Yeah, so Sacha, with that, does it differ from, you know, say like sex, male, female? Are they both the same composition in terms of fat and muscle?
Again, great question. So what we know, and we've actually got we've got a myth coming up which will answer this in a little bit more detail, and this actually goes back to, funnily enough, this goes back to caveman times. So the role of the man was to protect his family. It was to hunt for animals, and so he was actually out running across the plains and the deserts with a long spear for periods of time, and it was really important that he had a much higher muscle mass than was necessary for the female. So that hasn't changed. So today, men also carry a hormone called testosterone, which is very important for them for a number of reasons. And one of the things that testosterone does is to allow a man to carry higher amounts of muscle mass than a female. Now, getting right down into the nitty-gritty, a female's job, just as I've witnessed over the last 14 months, is to reproduce. So it is our job to carry a baby. And of course, carrying a baby, there's a lot of protection that is necessary for that. So females have sort of evolved to carry a lot more fat mass than males do. So definitely there are some females out there that carry higher muscle mass than other females do, but on the whole, it's much easier for a man to carry that lean mass and for females to carry fat mass.
Awesome. Thanks, Sacha. And we've got one more question just from Fiona Shepherd. Fiona, did you want to take yourself off mute, please, and ask your question? Fiona?
Hi, Fiona.
Can you hear us, Fiona?
Ace, do you want to read it out?
Yeah, I'll read it out. So what she's asked is 40 minutes, so 40 seconds on and 20 seconds off. Was the intensity 80% of max? Is that considered high intensity?
Yeah. So there still is. So that sort of, if it's only 40 seconds of work compared to, 4 hours of walking, you can certainly afford to exercise at a higher intensity. So if we're going back to talking about a kind of a fat burning protocol, then 40 seconds on at sort of 80 to 90% of max is right on the money.
Awesome. Thanks, Sacha.
Okay, no problem. So moving quite along, we've got sports science myth number 3. And again, I've obviously put these two back to back. If women lift heavy weights, will they get big and bulky? Now, for any coaches out there, I actually think this is a really vital. If ever you find basically that you've got females that are shying away from weight training, I beg you to kind of, if you've got a good relationship with them, to delve down into why that what might be. And so often I've heard from females, and I actually completed my honours research in this very topic, if you like, is so often women shy away from heavy weight training because they're worried that they're going to get big and bulky. Athletes will shy away. So a soccer player, for example, a female might shy away from weight training because she knows that she's a runner. At the end of the day, she's got to run on the field for 2 40-minute halves, and she doesn't want to be carrying any unnecessary bulk, and she doesn't want to look big and bulky. She wants to still look like a female athlete. But again, at the end of the day, this is false. And we kind of touched on this before. So females do not have the same muscle building hormones as men do. And one of those main muscle building hormones is testosterone. So testosterone expedites that muscle gain and maintenance, and women don't, unless they take it in a synthetic form, do not contain this. So it's actually really hard for women to gain muscle mass. Women can, of course, gain muscle mass, but it's going to need to be done with a strict calorie nutrition regime, as well as a rigorous training program, and it takes a long period of time. So by starting I think, to be honest, I think this, for the average female, if it's actually completing weight training is so important to avoid osteoporosis, to keep strength in the body. So often we see our older population of females actually, they're falling, they're not strong enough to support their bodies. And often this has come because they've had a lifestyle that hasn't encompassed strength training. And it would be really sad to think that they were shying away from that strength training because they were worried about getting big and bulky. So it's not going to happen easily for a female to get big and bulky. It requires an incredibly strict nutrition regime and vigorous training program. It takes a very long period of time, but strength training is vital for the athlete. It's vital for our aging population, and it's definitely something that females should not shy away from. H, any questions there?
We have one question. Fiona Brannigan, did you want to take yourself off mute, please, and ask your question?
Hi, Fiona.
Hi. I think you may have covered a little bit of it in that last slide. But in terms of like rehab from a muscle injury, do those same testosterone build muscle, does that change the rate of rehab for an injury to a muscle?
That is a gold standard question. That's a fantastic question. I'm going to document that for later use. So thank you, number one. Look, it's a great question. And I'll be honest and say probably not. So if you are rehabbing from an injury, if you've got, let's say you've got a foot injury, you're in a moon boot, you need to be in there for 6 to 8 weeks. Yes, you will see a huge atrophy of your calf muscle, say. Now, that atrophy will happen whether you're a male or a female. And when that moon boot comes off, despite the fact that a male is carrying more testosterone in his body, you will probably both build that muscle back fairly quickly. So you don't have to start doing a rigorous sort of calf program to get that muscle back. Again, the calf is one of our major walking muscles. So actually just taking that calf muscle off rest and starting to use it again will actually bring back that muscle mass relatively quickly. So, and what's probably interesting there is what we've seen with how we rehab not just injuries now, but operations. So you go into hospital and you have a complete hip reconstruction. The protocol of a recovery used to be sort of 6 weeks of bed rest. What we know now is that bed rest is going to serve to atrophy the entire body. The mental side of things, people get incredibly down and depressed when they can't get out and exercise to such a degree that we now have people up and walking again within 24 hours after knee reconstructions, hip reconstructions. So, so sorry, in a roundabout way, I hope I've answered your question, but basically there shouldn't be too much difference between a male and a female in terms of rehabbing a muscle from injury. And once you actually just start using that muscle again in general life and in training, that mass that was atrophied from the injury will come back fairly quickly. Does that help to answer your question?
That's amazing. Thank you, Sacha.
Excellent. All right. We're going to keep moving here because I'm already conscious of time. Sports science myth number 4, carbohydrates are bad for you. False, to start with. I wanted to there's one word in here that worries me. Can anyone take themselves off mute and tell me what the word is? What you think the word might be? Have a stab in the dark. There's one word in here that worries me. What's that word?
It would be bad.
It would be bad. Thank you, whoever answered that. And there's a reason for that. So often we get into a habit of labeling lots of things as good or bad. And what we've actually seen through the research is that it actually becomes a huge sort of psychological component here. So before we even start about answering or explaining this myth, I really just wanted to take a moment and have a look at these two words, good or bad. So, we tend to label ourselves good for eating a salad. We tend to label ourselves bad for eating a piece of cake. There's lots and lots of clients that I've worked with that will, testify to this. We have a piece of chocolate and we automatically think we're bad. Now, I haven't yet met a person that is a bad person because they've eaten a piece of chocolate. And I've also never met a person that is a good person because they've eaten salad. But what labeling food does is it creates it almost creates a fear around the food, and inherently it puts it on a pedestal. And what we find is that when something is on a pedestal, we might actually even want it more. Whereas if we had sort of put, chocolate in the same bag as we put apples and carrots, we might actually have found that, it tastes chocolate tastes good, but we'll just have it sometimes. The same as carrots and apples. They taste good, but if we eat 1,000 apples, they're also not going to be very good for us. So my thing here is what I ask people to do is be curious. Be curious about your habits and your choices as opposed to critical. So if you're finding that you're getting a sugar rush in the afternoon and you're wanting chocolate, you're not a bad person for wanting chocolate. It might actually be that you haven't eaten enough in the 24 hours leading up to a dip in your energy levels. It might well be that you haven't had enough sleep that night. And all it's doing is it's manifesting itself into a sugar low. And we're thinking that chocolate is going to be a quick fix to this. So I just wanted to add that in there. So whenever we're talking about, I try not to use the word good or bad for anything that I talk about because of this very reason. So when it comes to carbohydrates, the problem here is that carbohydrates are an entire food group. So if we label carbohydrates as bad, we're actually labeling an entire food group as bad. And we're putting cauliflower, which is an absolute superfood, into the same category as white bread. We're putting pinto beans into the same category as jelly beans. And just on that note, jelly beans, there are 5 food groups. Sorry, I'm going off topic here, but this is really interesting, and I'm quite interested in this. There are 5 food groups. You have your carbohydrates, so you have your breads and your grains, you've got your fruit, you've got your vegetables, you've got your proteins, so your meat and your eggs, and then of course you've got your dairy as well, so your yogurt and your cheeses. Jelly beans and lollies actually don't fit into any of those 5 food groups. Trust me, I've tried to make them fit and they don't fit anywhere. So if you're going to eat sugar, please eat chocolate, because at least that fits into calcium and you're getting some calcium at the same time. But let's take out soda drinks and pure sugar lollies. They don't actually need to be in the diet. They're not bad for you, but they don't need to be in the diet because they don't fit into a food group. Back to carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates actually have many vital roles in the body. So they actually help aid digestion. They will help that process of moving food through the body. They help you feel full for longer periods of time. They actually help keep your cholesterol levels in check as well. So I think what we're actually busting here is not the fact that carbohydrates are bad. We're busting the fact that there are simple carbohydrates and there are complex carbohydrates. And it's actually your complex carbohydrates, which are a rich source of nutrients and powerful phytochemicals. The difference between a complex carbohydrate and a simple carbohydrate is that they're made up of longer chains of sugar molecules. So it's still sugar at the end of the day, but that longer chain ensures that they take a lot longer to digest. They provide a steadier stream of blood sugar to the body, and they prompt a more gradual release of insulin, as opposed to that can of Coke or that handful of jelly beans, which will promote a very, very fast release of insulin, which also then leads to a crashing sugar low, which people tend to forget or don't tell you about. And the other important thing in there is that your simple carbohydrates actually don't contain fibre, or they contain very little fibre. But fibre, as we know, is absolutely vital for, again, all of those processes that occur in the body. So the refined carbohydrates in sugars and processed grains, so your sugars being these, jelly beans and these white breads and things, they're stripped of nutrients. They contain little to no fibre, and that is where we've got this concept that carbohydrates are bad from. But your complex carbohydrates, i.e. your legumes, your nuts, your seeds, your whole grains, your fruit, your vegetables, these are beneficial carbohydrates to have in a diet. They're actually superfoods and they're vital to have in your diet. So carbohydrates are not bad. It's the form of carbohydrate that we're consuming that tends to get labelled as being bad or good. Aish, any questions?
Well, Sacha, all I heard there is to eat more chocolate. Is that right?
Look, I've probably got to be a little bit mindful of what I say there, but I'm pleased you picked up on something. Let's go for dark chocolate over milk chocolate. Let's go for dark chocolate over jelly beans if we have to. Let's go for a small amount of dark chocolate in the evening or after lunch if you need to. But yeah, I'm pleased that you picked up on that. And yes, chocolate does actually contain calcium. So that is why I'm going to give it the tick up over your jelly beans and your Coca-Cola.
Thanks, Sacha. On a more serious note, Julian has a question. Julian, did you please want to take yourself off mute and please ask your question?
I'm off mute. Yeah, just your opinion about sports drinks. I've been trying to get rid of the coloured lolly drinks out of our sports club for a long time, and because they're a moneymaker, they still have them. But it's obviously they were developed by sports scientists, but now taken over by marketers. So sports drinks?
Julian, look, fantastic question. I've actually just done a whole presentation to Trinity College here in Perth on that very topic. Sports drinks have a role to play, but they are a multi-billion-dollar industry that have very, very, very clever marketing strategy behind them. They've become now something that are being consumed on a much higher rate than is actually necessary. So all that sports drink contains, they contain water, carbohydrate, and salt. Now, all those three things are very important, water, of course, being the most important one. There are three. I've actually got a great slide, which I'll share with the girls, and they can put it up on the website or somewhere to make available for everyone. But there's a great slide that I have sort of going through and giving the criteria, if you like, as to when a sports drink comes into its own and is actually beneficial. So roughly, if we're talking about exercising in extreme conditions of heat and humidity, sports drinks can be beneficial. If we're talking about exercising at a high intensity for over 90 to 120 minutes, sports drinks can be beneficial. And if we're talking about the type of exercise where we're really at risk of burning up all of our carbohydrate stores and all of our sodium stores, sports drink can be very beneficial. We're talking about marathons, Ironmans, the Tour de France, cycling, any of your most sort of extreme sports that happens over multiple days. We're not talking about general sport here. So for kids, playing rugby, soccer, cricket, there's absolutely no need to have sports drinks. How you get around that from a money point of view, again, the only thing that I can recommend is arming people with the science behind it. And the science will say that sports drinks have a beneficial effect in those extreme circumstances. But otherwise, we've got ourselves to a point where many of the corporate world are consuming sports drinks on a daily basis sitting behind a computer. That's how clever the marketing strategy has become. So, sorry, again, long-rounded answer, but there's no scientific evidence to say that sports drinks are beneficial over water for the majority of sports that we're talking about, on sort of game day, competition day. Does that help to answer your question, Julian?
Yeah, thanks. The other one was just is there a myth or is it true about getting your same number of grams of carbs into your body straight after a strenuous sporting event to allow your muscles to gain that, so they don't lose the ability to then work the next day if you're then going to another, especially in competitive, especially in my sport, you'll find you might play 7 games over 8 days. And I can't remember where I heard it, but basically, the idea of carving up your muscles straight after an event to allow them to regain the energy they need for the next day, it's got to be done within a certain time frame. Is that correct, or is that just me making that up?
No, that is correct. That is not a myth. So say if athletes can consume carbohydrates within 30 minutes of completing a training session or a competition, that gives the body the best chance of regenerating those carbohydrate stores sort of overnight in preparation for the next day. So don't get me wrong, your body will recover itself in its own time. But if we want to sort of fast track that recovery, then consuming carbohydrates within that 30 minutes after exercise is really important.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Sasha, we just have one more question before we move on to the next myth. There's just two kind of like one question, but another comment. So one was, I thought we should aim to eat different colors in food. So surprise jelly beans of multicolors is not considered good. And then the second one is, are sports drinks helpful during tournaments, multiple day events, but not as intense as marathon or Tour de France?
Sure. 2 great questions there. So I love the colour question, and absolutely, whoever has asked that question, you're absolutely right. It is really important to eat foods of lots of different colours, because we know. Let me just go back a step. So when we're talking about different coloured food, number one, we're talking about food, and already we've agreed that jelly beans don't actually come into the category of food. So I'm not considering jelly beans food. We're really talking about fruit and vegetables. So yes, jelly beans come in lots of different colours, but of course,
Oh no, we've lost Sasha. Bear with us for a few minutes. She might enter back. I think she must just be experiencing some technical difficulties. So please feel free to unmute yourself and talk amongst us. Is everyone enjoying the webinar? Thumbs up. Is anyone amongst us training for anything in particular? No. Coaching teams? Sport?
Be interesting that, I know we're in Melbourne, a lot of people have been not doing any sport for, completely missed a whole year of sport. Yep. And how that affects the intensity that they have to get to compared with Western Australia, New South Wales and Queensland when it comes to the state championships, is how are we going to be behind in those sports because we've had a year off and people have found it hard to exercise in the same way they've done in intensity. There's no gyms, there's very little sporting. Intense training, you can do a lot of low intensity training, as she was talking about, going for a walk for an hour, but that was about it we could do in Melbourne for about 6 months, I think it was. So just see how the athletes are going to affect the athletes in state championships over the next sort of 6 months, whether it has made any difference.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting to see. Yeah, and if there's any like compensation in terms of altering, I guess, the competition and how it's played, the game format, time, could be interesting if any of that's taken into consideration in running any of these tournaments and events. What sport are you a part of, Julian?
I'm with Nicole. I'm a hockey coach and hockey mentor coach for the Hockey Victoria network of coaches. Spent most of the time coaching girls and young women's hockey over the last 15 years. I'm looking to sort of help coaches and promote women's coaching that way. So that's one of my remits in that area.
And Julian, when's your tournament that you're training for?
Well, I'm not training. I'm just I'm a veteran now, so I'm a master's.
Yeah.
One of these people who've been sitting at a desk literally for 6 months as a teacher at a university. So I've lost complete, talk about atrophy. Is atrophy that you're talking about? Yeah, I've gone back to training and really noticed it the last few weeks. But it's about the fact that I know we've got a group of 18s and 15s going to Tasmania in a month or so, 2 months' time. I'd like to see how that sort of happens.
Okay. 2 months,
Yeah.
not long.
I know.
Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Fantastic.
We just can't see you.
You can't see me.
Yes. Okay. So we just take.
Look, that probably doesn't matter.
Okay, that's okay.
Does that matter?
No, it's okay.
All right. Oh, here we go. Start video. Right. Now, sorry, where was I? Jelly beans. So bottom line is jelly beans are multiple colours, but they're still the same thing. They're still they're just made with different, colorings, different sugar colorings. They don't have any nutritional value to the body. So when we talk about different colours of food, we're talking about our fruit and our vegetables. And it is completely true that foods of different colours actually have different vitamins and different minerals. And what I think is interesting here is that we tend to, number one, we've always been told to eat our greens. So people tend to gravitate towards green vegetables. But actually, vegetables, you've got orange, you've got purple cabbage, you've got wonderful colours out there. And the other thing is that because we've got this society where food is, we can access the same vegetables all year round. We've got fruit and vegetables being grown in green. It's not seasonal anymore. We've got fruit and vegetables being grown in greenhouses, so we can eat the same thing. Is that we tend to get a little bit locked into eating the same fruit and vegetables on a daily basis. So we go to the supermarket, we do our supermarket shop, and we always grab apples, oranges, bananas, and broccoli, cucumber and potatoes. So my pledge is to go, when you next go to the supermarket, is to not only consume foods of different colours, but take yourself out on a limb and try some fruit and vegetables that you've never heard of before, because no doubt they will contain different vitamins and minerals that you might not have in your diet. Now, remind me, the second question was...
So the second question was around sports drinks. Are they helpful during tournaments, multiple day events?
Yeah, look. One thing that I have found with sports drinks is that kids do tend to like them. They do taste good. What you can do is you can water them down, so you can at least, as opposed to drinking, because if anyone here is, I'm sure you all have, you've tried a Gatorade, they're incredibly sweet and they're incredibly strong. And it would be much more beneficial to drink twice that quantity of fluid and get some of that sodium and carbohydrate in if necessary. So if it is a particularly hot day, if we're talking about a tennis tournament and there are, going to be 4 or 5 matches, even if they're short sets played within a day or over a weekend, then alongside a balanced diet, it might be beneficial at times to get some additional sodium and carbohydrate in from sports drinks. But it's important to have water as well. And I think if you can, water down those sports drinks, it's also a way of, especially with our young kids, is we're trying to not get them to the habit of wanting, getting addicted to this super sugary taste. Because it can happen from a very young age. And so I think at least watering, those sports drinks down, they can still feel like they're a professional athlete by consuming the sports drink, but you know, it's not as strong. And the other thing is that you can buy powders in the supermarket. So you can buy Staminade, you can buy Gatorade all as powder and make it up to your own taste, which I think is something you know, definitely to consider if we're talking about using sports drinks at all.
Perfect. Thanks, Sasha. We can keep going to sports science myth number 5.
Sports science myth number 5, carbohydrate loading means eating a huge bowl of pasta the night before competition. Now, I'll let you into a little secret here. I actually, I busted this myth for myself personally with, I think it was my second Ironman. So it's false, by the way, and I found out the hard way. So I ate a bowl of pasta that was close to my body weight the night before one of my Ironmans. And yeah, it was a grave mistake. So I basically, without going into too much detail, but I continued to bring up that bowl of pasta throughout the swim leg and the bike leg. Had nothing in the body for the run, and it was a complete disaster. So carbohydrate loading is not a myth, but eating a huge bowl of pasta the night before competition is not the way that it's done. What we are trying to do is look at true carbohydrate loading. Now, true carbohydrate loading actually happens over a period of about 38 to 48 hours prior to competition, and it must also be done at the same time as the taper. So there's no good starting to carbohydrate load if you're still exercising for hours on end at a super high intensity, because your body's just going to burn up that carbohydrate. So really, it must be done in conjunction with the taper. So the taper is, of course, where we're starting to bring down that training load in preparation of being fresh for competition. And that's the time where we can load up the body, if you like, over sort of a couple of days, not just the night before competition, but a couple of days prior. And really the science behind it. So what we're trying to do with carbohydrate loading, we're not just trying to eat our body weight in pasta, because I promise you that that's the hard way. What we're trying to do is we're trying to absolutely maximize our glycogen stores. So remember, glycogen is how glucose is stored in the body. So glycogen is stored, so glucose is stored as glycogen in the muscles and the liver. When we exercise, and especially when we increase our intensity, that glycogen gets broken down into glucose that we can then access. So we don't actually use glycogen in its purest form when it's in the muscle and it's in the liver. We can only use it when it's available as glucose in our bloodstream. So, you know, from all the research that we've done, we have actually found that carbohydrate loading done correctly can improve performance by around about 2 to 3%, because it increases the body's pre-exercise glycogen stores by up to 50 to 100%. It can increase endurance by up to 20%, in endurance athletes who compete for longer than 90 minutes. So that also tells us that true carbohydrate loading is not necessary for most of our sports out there. So it's not necessary to carbohydrate load the body for any of your team sports. Carbohydrate loading only comes into its own for your endurance and your extreme endurance sports. Now, this does also lead us to talk about maintaining fuel levels, because certainly, you know, all of our team sport athletes, your combat athletes, anyone who is athletic is still at risk of experiencing a drop in blood glucose and muscle glycogen levels. And this is when you feel that sort of that fatigue and that tizziness and that hunger coming on. And that's where a quick absorbing carbohydrate such as a sports gel can be beneficial. But really what we ask athletes to do is to evaluate their eating habits 24 hours prior to an event. So a team sport athlete doesn't necessarily need to carbohydrate load in its truest form, but they do need to evaluate their eating habits 24 hours prior to a training event or a competition to ensure that they do have adequate stores of blood glucose and muscle glycogen in the body. Now, one of the things that I hear from athletes all the time is I can't eat breakfast or I can't eat before I train because it makes me feel sick. Aish, I'm kind of looking at you a little bit here as well. Guilty. She's this is a conversation that we've had offline. Yeah, there's actually, so, you know, breakfast is called as such, it's breaking the fast. Overnight, we've been fasting. And the idea of breakfast is to break that fast and to help restore the body's muscle glucose and muscle glycogen and blood glucose levels. So overnight, the liver, so glycogen is stored in the liver and the muscles, liver glycogen can drop by up to 2/3. So, you know, that's really quite a huge huge amount. So eating breakfast and evaluating those eating habits 24 hours prior to exercise, one negates the necessary need to consume a bowl of pasta that is your body weight prior to a competition, and just understanding from the science that really that carbohydrate loading is only really reserved for those endurance events. Any questions there?
Sacha, we have one question. What's the best halftime game snack?
Oranges.
Oranges. Okay.
Definitely oranges. Oh, look, I think, to be honest, when we're talking about a half-time game snack, can I have a context of a sport? This is a team sport, I assume. Rugby. It doesn't really matter what it is. Let's assume it's an AFL, it's a hockey, it's a rugby, it's a soccer. It's hockey. Excellent. Love hockey. I used to play myself. Now, what is hockey? Is hockey now 40 minutes a half? I think it is. Maybe not for...
It's quarters now, 70 minutes quarters.
Oh, you're right. It's quarters. Gosh, I've been in Ironman triathlons too long. Thank you. It's quarters now. So, look, to be honest, if there's completely no need to consume food during a hockey match. That's the bottom line. If you have evaluated your eating habits properly 24 hours prior to a hockey match, there should actually be no need to consume any food at halftime during a hockey match. Fluids will be necessary. We're sweating a lot. We're losing, we are losing a lot of fluid that way. And we certainly get a dry mouth, and we can, it can just make our mood feel a lot better if we can get a cool, palatable fluid in. But scientifically, there shouldn't be any actual physiological need in the body to consume food during an event that lasts the length of time that a hockey match does. The Rottnest Island Channel Crossing, which was completed here in Perth just on Saturday, so one of my girlfriends, I thought she was going to take 5.5 hours. Conditions were pretty hectic. She was swimming for 8.5 hours. Now, that is a sport where you need to consume food. A hockey match is not long enough to fully justify needing food. And if you have an athlete that is getting hungry during a hockey match, they haven't eaten enough in that 24 hours prior to the event. It's not because they're actually needing to regenerate their glucose or glycogen stores within the event. Does that answer a question okay?
Yes, and just one more. Many players eat bananas or apples pre-game. Is this good? Or, no, I shouldn't say good. Is this of value?
Oh, Aish, so already I've done my job. You've able to, look at that word good and want to reevaluate. So I absolutely love that. Definitely it's prior to any high intensity, sport or game or activity that we're going to participate in, we do want to keep our glucose levels topped up, and eating something that is going to be easily digested by the body is really beneficial. And something like a piece of fruit tends to sit well. I mean, a banana tends to be a very go-to fruit for a lot of athletes. It's fairly quick to absorb. It's non-acidic, so often athletes want to avoid your acidic fruits like an orange, because that can play havoc on the gut. Probably the most important thing, and I think this is again, if you take away anything from this presentation, I think this is a really important one to take away: how you eat that banana. Now, I know this sounds a bit bizarre, but how you eat that banana prior to that game is actually almost more important than the fact that it is a banana. What we have tended to do in this day and age is inhale food. And trust me, you've probably seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. Athletes peel a banana, and I'm talking inhale it. It's like a vacuum cleaner, and it just suddenly disappears down the chute. That banana then sits in the stomach, and your intestines have to work incredibly hard to then chew up that banana, if you like, into a form where the glucose, the glycogen, the carbohydrates that is in that banana can then be released into the bloodstream. So more importantly than whether it's an apple or a banana that an athlete is eating prior, encourage your athletes to chew their food and then swallow it. And that, I think, is a really important one to be aware of. Does that answer a question?
Perfect. Thanks. We can keep going.
Okay. We won't. Let's keep going. You just tell me. So, sports science myth number 6: lactic acid is bad. So already we know why I don't like this statement. Purely, one, because we've used the word bad, and purely because people that say that lactic acid are bad actually haven't taken the time to understand the science behind lactic acid at all. So let me help you to explain the science behind lactic acid. So lactic acid is a compound that is formed when glucose is broken down under certain conditions in any living creature. Now, in a human, that breakdown of lactic acid is it's a really important part of producing energy for strenuous exercise, and it helps with certain liver functions. So basically what we have is when lactic acid is broken down, it actually breaks down very quickly into two compounds. One is called lactate and the other is hydrogen ions. So it's not actually lactic acid itself that is responsible for any burning sensations that we feel in the body. It's the hydrogen ions that accompany this lactate that is what we feel. So so what we need to know here is that if the body didn't produce lactate, then acidosis and muscle fatigue would actually occur very, very quickly, and your performance would be severely impaired. So the production of lactate is actually vital to performance. And it's only, so we get the lactic acid being produced, that gets broken down into lactate and hydrogen ions, and the hydrogen ions just happen to be a byproduct of lactate when we're operating in an energy source where oxygen isn't present. So remember, when we're talking about an endurance event and we've got oxygen helping the fuel breakdown, lactate doesn't tend to be produced as quickly, and we don't have the problem of these hydrogen ions building up. So it's really only when it's the super high intensity exercise that we get this production of lactic acid, we get the breakdown into lactate and these hydrogen ions. So really, and the other thing is, don't forget that, you know, our bodies weren't designed, you know, we weren't produced with athletic performance being the most important thing. We were formed with this fight or flight mechanism. And lactic acid actually comes into a survival mechanism and a flight mechanism. So it enables the body to flee a stressful situation if it needs to. So yes, running around on a hockey pitch and a football pitch is something that we've come to sort of grow and love. But fleeing, what we're also doing, if you want to get down into sort of the the caveman times, which I completely love, reverting back to caveman times, hockey is also about fleeing a stressful situation. And that is where lactic acid and lactate really come into their own. So when one of your athletes tells you that lactic acid is bad, or you're going to give them a high intensity session and it's going to hurt them forever, and their muscles, their legs are going to fall off, just remind them that, the importance of lactate and lactic acid and what a vital energy source that it actually is. Any questions there? That is a very quick science synopsis of a very complex situation. So we might well, complete a full webinar on this topic in the future. So don't stress too much if you haven't fully understood that. Yeah, any questions from what we have just heard?
No questions at the moment, Sacha.
Okay, anyway, let's go on. No pain, no gain. Now, again, this is one that we've heard so many times when it comes to athletic performance. No pain, no gain. And again, this is false. So it's an exercise motto. And I think if we actually really delve deep into what no pain, no gain actually stands for, it's become a motto that promises greater value rewards for the price of hard and even painful work. And I think it's something that we just need to, be a little bit mindful of when we're prescribing training programs to our athletes as well. So under this sort of conception of no pain, no gain, competitive professionals such as athletes are almost required to endure pain, which is physical suffering, and stress, which is mental and emotional suffering, to achieve personal excellence. And it doesn't have to be this way. Now, of course, there is a level of discomfort that comes with training and competition, which is completely healthy. There is a burning and a tiredness that comes from your muscles. It's completely normal to be out of breath at the end of a workout, but feeling actual pain is something that nobody should really have to endure, if you like. So I think what's important here is that pain is different to the benefits of exercise. Pain is the possibility that the body is telling you that something is breaking here and needs to be mended. So there is a difference between pain and discomfort. And I think it's actually important that we start educating, or we do educate our athletes to understand the difference between the two. Discomfort is normal, being out of breath is normal, tired, burning sensations in the body is normal, but actual pain means that the exercise needs to be stopped and that pain needs to be looked at by a medical professional. And I think this is a really key reason for being very proactive in talking to your athletes about form during training sessions. So during any executing all of your drills, sprinters don't do so. Usain Bolt, take Usain Bolt for example, he doesn't sprint the 100 meters in training. He spends most of his training sessions doing hundreds upon hundreds of drills to perfect his sprinting form. Now, there's no good completing those drills if he's not doing them properly. So what we need scrutiny by the coach. That is part of the coach's job. The coach's job is not just to hold the stopwatch. The coach's job is to create that art of coaching, if you like. And part of that art is that scrutinized eye to pick up good form and poor form. I just used the word good there, so let me rephrase that. To pick up form that is going to be beneficial for athletic performance. So if an athlete is performing a drill or an exercise with proper form, there should not be any pain involved. If there is pain involved, that exercise needs to be stopped. Again, look at any of your professionals, your tennis players that will be the first to call a timeout, an injury timeout, if they need to. They know the difference between pain and general fatigue and muscles hurting. Which does, if we can hold off the questions for 1 second, because it leads me into our final myth that rest days are for lazy people. And again, it's possible that I'm talking to both of the Women's Coaching Association founders here, because I know that sometimes they can, in their training for a 70.3 Ironman, which in itself is an incredible event, but it certainly doesn't mean that the body needs to be training 7 days a week and 24 hours a day. Rest days are not for lazy people. Scheduled rest days are actually vital. They're necessary for muscle repair, preventing fatigue, reducing the risk of injury, and enhancing sleep and performance. So it's actually been found that, when we produce levels of cortisol, which is a stress response hormone, we produce levels of adrenaline, which is our kind of fight or flight hormone. And if we exercise 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we maintain high levels of cortisone and adrenaline in our body that doesn't actually get dissipated, and it impacts on our sleep that night. So if you are exercising a huge amount and you potentially find that you're not sleeping very well, it might actually be, as the science is telling us, that you're not resting enough. So skipping rest days can lead to overtraining and burnout. And again, this is something that we find in, a lot of your elite athletes have experienced overtraining or burnout, but I think we're getting a little bit, I want to say that we're getting more and more clued up about how important these rest days are. And again, if we're going to take something away from this presentation, the word that I want you to take away, Aisha's going to tell me what the word is.
Yes.
What's the word that everyone's going to take away from this presentation?
Rest.
This is word, it begins with P. I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit.
Yeah.
We spoke about it the other day. So as opposed to being reactive to what needing to take a rest day,
proactive.
We're going to start being proactive. So, Aish was kindly telling me that she will exercise and exercise and exercise until she's so exhausted that then she'll allow herself to take a rest day or a rest afternoon or maybe even a rest minute or two. And I'm saying that if we can actually schedule rest days into the program, it takes out a lot of the guesswork, if you like, as to whether athletes are overtraining or not training, training too much or not. So it's nothing to say that you can't complete low impact activities on rest days. So there's no problem to complete some yoga, take the dog for a walk on the beach, go for a cruisy swim. But it's taking away that high intensity exercise and just allowing the lactate levels to dissipate. It's allowing the glycogen, the blood glucose levels and the muscle glycogen levels to rejuvenate. It's allowing those cortisol levels and that adrenaline to dissipate. It's allowing the body to be prepared to fight another day of training, if you like. So if you're taking anything away from whether or not you need a rest day, there's a few key things here. So if you're someone that is not scheduling a rest day into their training, or if you're a coach that has decided that you're not going to schedule rest days into your athletes' training, which I'm sure none of you do, but if you have an athlete that has persistent muscle soreness that is not improving, that might be an indication that they need a rest day or even another rest day. Again, taking 2 rest days in a row, I know Aish is almost falling off her chair here, but you know,
what does that mean? What does that look like?
Okay, and to be honest, in the background, I've actually started preparing a whole nother webinar just for Aish on what you can do on a rest day, because there are many things that you can do on a rest day that will be just as productive as actually doing the exercise itself. So if you have an athlete that has experienced extreme exhaustion and fatigue, again, that might be an indication that they need a rest day. Persistent muscle or joint pain, it might be a sign of an overuse injury. An overuse injury, which we tend to get from endurance sports, the only way of getting rid of an overuse injury is to rest. If you're finding that some of your athletes have emotional changes, and this happens, you know, this is, I think, is a really key one. And it's not, you know, I'm sure, you know, you've experienced athletes, angry athletes and stressed athletes and bitchy athletes. Now, a lot of this comes down to the amount of, you know, physical work that they're and the stress that they're under. So if you have an athlete that is experiencing sort of unusual irritability, crankiness, mood swings, again, it might actually be that they're physically burnt out and they've got an imbalance in those hormones like a serotonin or a cortisol. So, you know, ask the question. And I think, again, so much of, you know, all of these myths come down to communication as well. So talk to your athletes, talk to your coaches and make sure that communication level is intact. Again, if you're not getting, you know, if you're an athlete and you're pushing the body, you should be sleeping quite well at nighttime. If you're not sleeping well, again, this might actually be because the body has high levels of cortisol and adrenaline that it can't get rid of because rest days aren't being scheduled in. And again, the last thing here is if progression stops, if an athlete is no longer progressing, if they're not improving, and their everyday normal routine is starting to feel very difficult, again, this might be a really key indication that they need a rest day. One other thing that I wanted to add in here is diet on rest days, because again, I think there can be a bit of a misconception as to, you know, if I'm taking a rest day, maybe I don't need to eat. Now, you do need to eat. You need to eat every day. You might need less calories because you're not as active, but certainly your quality of diet is just as important on a rest day as it is on a training day. So adequate protein to support muscle repair, complex carbohydrates to restore your glycogen levels, you know, good hydration, I've just said the good word again, adequate hydration to ensure that you're not getting muscle cramps and you're enhancing those deliveries of nutrients throughout the body, and fruit and vegetables for healthy carbohydrate and nutrients that support recovery. So diet on rest days is important. And that's me. So conscious that we've gone well over time, which was probably inevitable. So apologies for those of you on the Eastern states who are now getting into your bedtime and dinner time. But if you do have any final questions, please let me know now. Aish, have we got any?
We do have 2 questions, and we'll probably finish on those 2. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email Sacha on the email that's listed there. And we'll make sure that we get to them as soon as possible. But the last 2 questions that we'll finish off on is 1, is there a recommendation for the duration of a training session for a weekend player in hockey per se?
Is there recommended duration for a training session for a weekend player such as an athlete playing hockey?
Yeah.
Great question. I think before we talk about duration of a training session, I think ask the question of what is trying to be achieved with the training session. And again, look, that's a great question. That it really is a great question, because it's led me to thinking on the spot, explain to you this scenario, which I don't think happens enough, is why are we doing a training session? What is the training session for? So what is it trying to achieve? And if the coach and the athlete cannot answer that question, then the training session doesn't need to take place, and the duration of the training session is sort of meaningless anyway. So what is it that's trying to be achieved? Are we trying to top up that athlete with some additional cardio because they've missed out on cardio during the week? That is a valid reason to complete a training session, and we might deem, because it's a hockey, sending them out for a 20-kilometre run really is not going to help their hockey in any way, shape or form. So instead, we might decide to put them through 30 or 40 minutes of agility drills on the hockey pitch using cones and, change of direction cues. If the goal of the training session is to enhance their skills, if we're deeming that their flick or their drag is not quite up to par and they just need a little bit of additional, time, we might give them 20 minutes of flicking a ball into the net. So I think rather than going to a duration, first of all, ask the question of what are we trying to achieve with the training session, and then the duration, I think, will speak for itself.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Sacha. We really appreciate it. We hope everyone that's attended today has enjoyed the presentation just as much as I have. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you having you here, and we look forward to some more presentations from you in the future. So
absolutely, and I'll just say a thank you to you guys as well. Thank you for hosting me. I'm super excited to start some collaborations with Women's Coaching Association. It's going to be a super exciting journey. And to finish off my story that started with the Ironman at the start of the presentation, I'm just an average Joe. I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not even a good athlete. And I've even used the G word. But by busting these myths alongside a sensible training program, I was able to get myself, to the World Championships, complete I don't know, I think I came 7th in the world for my age group on the day. And so I think that, just goes to show that if you understand the science behind what you're doing, you can save a lot of pain, a lot of heartache kind of along the way, and you can educate your athletes as to what really is beneficial for their training to take them to that next performance level.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, again, thanks everyone for attending. This session has been recorded, so it will be available to you soon. Please feel free to share it, widely. I'm sure a lot of people got a lot out of this presentation today, so it'd be great for as many people as possible to view it and learn from all these wonderful things that we've learned today from Sacha. So thank you.